Go Jackets.
Absolutely. Go Jackets. India is about 80% Hindu. The big minority there is Muslims. It's about 13 or 14% Muslims. Christians are about maybe 2.5 to 3%. There is persecution of Christians in India. I was always obsessed with seeking after the next accomplishment in life, defining myself by those things. The temptations are real. You want to taste the forbidden fruit. Watching pornography or going out to a strip club, that's when you risk really getting to a point of no return. Are you leaving our family? I was lying to myself. Anybody could have seen this from a mile away. Why am I doing it? I messed up.
I can rewrite my story starting today.
I would not have got this were it not for God's grace. That means a lot to me. Could give me peace. Explore this Jesus guy. What the human heart really wants at the end is a sense of security. Where you spend your ever after. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. It is a relationship. It's not just a religion. Forgiveness is not a license to sin. You will be harming yourself in the long term. I also understand what it can cost you. Non-Indians need to know.
Your parents had an arranged marriage. How is kind of your faith and your culture kind of all blended into dating?
Yeah. So let me say up front, when it comes to my dating history,
challenge yourself constantly.
You have to be a little bit patient.
I felt like I was in a hole looking up.
The whole idea is you have to become content in singleness.
I'd be lying if I said I haven't fired off some Instagram DMs.
The word dating is not mentioned in the Bible.
I dedicated my life at Tomorrow World to Jesus.
Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey, it's Carlton French. You're listening to the Single Man Podcast. This week, I'm joined here with my good friend, Ashwin Ignatius. Ashwin, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm excited for you to be here to share some of your story. And I think it's really going to encourage the listeners. And your just friendship in my life has been something I've really treasured the last couple of years that we've known each other. And so I think your boldness and sharing your story is going to really encourage people today. So appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Blessed to be here.
Before we jump into things, I wanted to quickly thank everybody for listening to the podcast at this point, this being episode 7 out of the 52 in total I'm hoping to do. It's been awesome getting feedback and engagement, hearing that people are really enjoying the podcast so far. So I really appreciate everybody that's been listening and sharing episodes, and excited to hear some Jesus stories that have come out of the first 6 episodes to this point, and the stories that men have been able to share about how they came to faith and how they would give their self advice if they could go back in a time machine and talk to their younger self, and then how they're navigating dating and relationships has been really encouraging. So really appreciate all the feedback. I also want to announce on this episode that I've just launched a Patreon page for anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes of the podcast. And it's totally free to join and join the Single Man Podcast community there on Patreon. The link to that will be in the description of this on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or on the Instagram, the Single Man Podcast. You can go to check that out if you're interested. It'll just be me posting a little bit more behind the scenes information on guests that are coming on and the editing process, as I'm doing everything myself with the podcast at this point. So I think just want to have that as an option, as I've been new to podcasting and content creation. It's been a little bit of a tension of mine. Like, I want to get feedback from the audience and understand who's listening, and I haven't really been able to do that just through the normal means of who Spotify tells me is listening and who YouTube tells me is listening in terms of demographics, but would really love to get to know you on a little bit more of a personal level. So feel free to do that if it's of interest, and no pressure. If it's of not, it's totally free to join. And we'll jump into Ashwin's story now. So Ashwin is 27 and lives in Atlanta here in Sandy Springs. recently bought a townhouse, which is exciting. And he is originally from India, was born in India, and then grew up in Austin, Texas, and came to Atlanta to go to school at Georgia Tech, which is where I went to school as well. Go Jackets.
Absolutely. Go Jackets.
And he now works in software engineering at one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and he's just crushing it at life. And so I'm honored to have you on today, Ashwin, and for you to share with the audience some of your story.
Great. Glad to be here. And I'll add one thing to what you said. Like, I was born in India, but I did not come directly from India to Texas. There was about a 10-year intermission, you could say, there in California. When I was 3 years old, my family moved from India to California, and I kind of grew up there. Then in 2010, they moved to Austin, Texas, and they're still there. So nowadays, if people ask me what my hometown is, it is Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. There we go. Cool. Well, Ashwin, so the audience can get to know you a little bit more. What's maybe been your favorite and your least favorite part of this last week here?
Oh man, this past week, my favorite part has been, and this might be a cliche answer that you've heard before, but our men's group on Sunday night that meets, lately, like, I have had work being extremely busy on me. Like, it's been a lot later since I've signed off every day. And when you got a really busy week like that, sometimes having group on Mondays, being around that group of guys, it's very refreshing to like just be doing life with guys who are going through the same thing you're going through and helping you like deal with the things you're dealing with, like from a Christian perspective. So the Monday night group would be my high of the week. My low of the week is actually not work. It's actually something a bit like worse than that. So I found out on Friday that I'm going to have to replace my entire refrigerator in my house.
Oh, wow.
So a few weeks ago, I'd say shortly before Easter, I realized the water was not running in the water dispenser where you get drinking water from your refrigerator. That was not working. So I called the refrigerator company. They said they'd send a technician over for free on Friday to take a look at it. He pulled my refrigerator out and looked at it. It turns out the line that brings water into the refrigerator is fully frozen up. So in the back, just imagine in the back of your refrigerator, you have a gigantic slab of ice mounted onto the back, surrounded by a bunch of rust because of all the impact it's caused on the metal. And it also pulled out like some of the wall behind it.
Oh, gosh.
So I'm going to have to get this refrigerator replaced and that wall redone. Part of me did get a bit frustrated on Friday because this was we noticed this issue before I bought the house that the water was not running. And we asked the previous owners, hey, can you fix this? They must have done some half-handed fix to let's just get it looking good. Let's just get it working enough till he buys the place. So they could have easily afforded like the fix and properly repaired it. But yeah, now all that cost is on me. So that is not news you exactly want to receive on a Friday, but like, hey, like God is good. I'm sure like God is good. Like I had to calm myself down by saying that a few times on Friday.
Right. The joys of home ownership, right?
Yes.
Awesome, man. Well, sorry that you're going through that, but there'll be something, maybe a positive that'll come out of it, I'm sure. So, yeah, I want to jump into a little bit about your story, Ashwin, and your background. Growing up, being born in India and then moving to California, like you said, and then in Texas. At what point kind of did you come to believe in Jesus, and how did your childhood kind of play into that?
Yeah, so when telling you my story of how I came to know Jesus, I cannot start that without beginning with my parents. So we need to start, I was born in 1997. We need to start the clock a few years before that in India. My entire extended family over there is Catholic. So like we knew like who Jesus was. We were always like in the church. Like we knew we knew like the basics of the church. We did all the rituals and that kind of stuff. My parents, their journeys of getting saved started to happen in the 1990s. My mom, when she was in college, had a roommate who did know Jesus, was a born-again Christian. And through that person, my mom slowly started learning more. She started learning more about the faith, like reading the Bible on her own, saying her own prayers instead of like these pre-written ones. And so that's how she came to know Jesus. after my parents got married, like she started sharing some of what she went through with my dad, and he began slowly he slowly started exploring the faith and like getting into it. And as they were Catholic, Christian and Catholic were synonyms to them. They were interchangeable terms to my parents in India.
Yeah.
And just in the 90s, when I was born in 97, when I was super young, around that time, like they are starting to figure out that, okay, maybe like this Venn diagram is not a circle here. Like maybe there is more to like following Jesus than like the rituals and the things that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize the fact that even when they were Catholic, my parents were devout in it. Like my dad tells me often that he read the Bible cover to cover 4 times before he truly knew Jesus. So like
Wow.
they knew of Jesus, like they knew like I believe like this, and this. But the personal relationship aspect of it, that was the part that was very an alien concept to them. Now, they're figuring all of this out when I'm just born. In 2000 is when my family comes over to America. When my parents come to America, they get confused out of their mind with all the denominations in the country. Because as I just said, in India, it was Christian equals Catholic, and then, okay, maybe that's not exactly the case. That's kind of where they were. When they come to America, they're like, what's a Baptist? What's a Methodist? What is an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian? What are all these 101 denominations? They were very confused, didn't know where to go to church. And in this kind of a backdrop, we went back to the Catholic Church for some time, and so my sister and I were fully raised in the Catholic Church. It's not because they gave up their pursuit of seeking Jesus. This was their thinking with that is, their thinking was, we're still figuring this out on our own. We don't fully know what it means to follow Jesus by ourselves. And if our kids see us church hopping every Sunday, trying a different thing every week, they're going to get the impression that this is not that important. This is a secondary thing. At least let's give them like the fundamentals, the basics of the faith. Like let them know who Jesus is, like know the core of the faith, like about reading the scripture and all, while we figure this whole thing out. And so for pretty much the whole 10 years we were in California, we were attending a Catholic church. I grew up in it, like went through if any of the listeners like are of a Catholic background, like I went through like the sacraments, had like my first Holy Communion, was baptized as an infant. I served as an altar boy and everything.
Wow.
And while they're going through this whole journey, my parents eventually, they slowly started meeting some people, like other Christians, other Indian Christians, people of their same cultural background that they could relate with, who were born again Christians, who were deeply following Jesus. And they slowly started taking me to Bible studies, to prayer meetings and things like that. And I was gradually getting exposed to okay, yeah, let me read the Bible on my own. Let me pray a little bit on my own. Let me not just listen to what's being read. Let me think about it on my own in that sense. And so that's kind of what I was going through growing up. And keep in mind, this is all before I'm 10 years old. So my understanding of it is not the most it was not the most complete. It was the bits that I could understand. And as I grew older, I understood it a bit more.
Yeah. I guess going back to your parents, being born in India and you being born in India, just so the audience has a little bit more context, is it uncommon to be Catholic or Christian in India? I feel like that's something that I would be surprised to learn as someone that's, lived in Georgia his whole life, that people are even Catholic or Christian in India.
It is a rare thing in India. There are Christians in India, and there have been for a long time. But the total demographics of India right now is about 80% Hindu. The big minority there is Muslims. It's about 13 or 14% Muslims. Christians are about maybe 2.5 to 3%. I mean, sometimes depending on which source you consult or whatnot, and depending on how people might identify themselves because of various social pressures, some people have put it even as high as, say, 5%. But overall, Christians are a very small minority in India. An interesting fact on that is that Christianity has actually been present in some quantity in India since the 1st century AD. So the Apostle Thomas, who people might know as Doubting Thomas, he actually went to India after Jesus' resurrection.
Yeah.
He did his ministry in India, and in fact, his tomb in India, like his tomb is actually present in India. I've seen it, like it's a shrine now that's like operated and maintained by the Catholic Church. I've seen it and prayed in it multiple times when I was a kid.
Wow.
So yeah, like it had the seeds were sown a long time ago, but yeah, we're like hopefully the harvest will be more plentiful.
Wow, that is wild. Yeah, I knew Thomas went to do his, mission work, or he was sent to India, and I think he was the furthest of all of the apostles as well that got sent. Most of them were, sent around to modern day Europe or the Middle East now. But yeah, it's funny. Thomas was the one that doubted the most, right? Or he's documented in the Bible to have doubted, and then he was convinced to the point to go the furthest of any of the apostles.
Hey, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
amen for that.
And now, like 2,000 years later, your parents come to belief in Jesus, or they
Yeah.
have like some understanding of faith, and then it's now impacting you in the year
Correct.
of 2024.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add about my upbringing was that like going off of like how like as I just said, Christians still being a minority in India.
Yeah.
Now, the neighborhood that I grew up in California, like it was a bit of a bubble. Like the neighborhood I grew up in was over 80% Asian. So I grew up around like my closest friends there growing up were all other Indians, and we shared a similar cultural background, and all of them saw me as a Christian. Like to help people understand here, like in India, when someone sees like they don't care what denomination you are, how much you pray, what spiritual journey you might be going through. When people see your name and your family and they can make out that like, oh, like that's not like an Indian name or something like that, you are a Christian for all intents and purposes to them. Like my full name is Ashwin Samuel Ignatius. So when my friends would see that and think like, wait a minute, Samuel, that's not an Indian name. Ignatius, that's really not an Indian name. They think like, oh, you must be a Christian. Like on your ID card in India, if they see a Christian name like Paul or Anthony or something like that, like you are a Christian for all intents and purposes to them. And so being Christian, like in a way I can say I didn't really have a choice in identifying as it, because everyone around me, like all my friends and their parents, they would know, oh yeah, like your family's Christian, you're Christian. So I was always, you could say, like labeled as a Christian in that sense.
Yeah.
And as I'm going through all my spiritual journey and everything, like none of my friends who I grew up with they would not know or understand the details of it. To them, it would just be like, yeah, you're a Christian. This is your community. It's your family. It's what your parents do. It's what you grew up with. Like, what's this like transformation, like following Jesus thing?
Yeah. So did you ever face any like persecution almost, or like judgment from people because you were like so easily identified as being a Christian? That was India?
I would definitely not say like persecution, like with me growing up here.
Yeah.
Like my friends that I grew up with, we were all like very respectful of like each other's beliefs and whatnot. Like I definitely was conscious about the fact that like I was a minority. So like I definitely didn't participate in all of their events. Like there is persecution of Christians in India. By no means am I saying that doesn't happen. Like it unfortunately absolutely does happen. But like me growing up, like in the place that I grew up, like I never felt any persecution or exclusion from my friends for like being Christian. Like they saw this as like, this is a religion. There's people that follow it, and like, hey, like we will be respectful of it.
Okay. That's great. I guess, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like, yes, it was good that like while my close friends were not believers, like I never had any active hostility there.
Yeah. But we are called in James to count it joy when we face trials of many kinds.
Yes.
So
Of course. Yes, yes.
So, okay, Ashwin, so you come to, the U.S., you grew up in California, and then, you said that Austin's kind of like your hometown. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where you really matured. Is that where you'd say kind of grew into that personal relationship with Jesus, or when did that kind of come about, other than just being, okay, well, this is what my parents, tell us to do on Sundays, so that's what I'm doing?
Yeah, it definitely was after I came to Austin. So my like around 2009 to 2011 is when a lot of like the salvation work in my family, I would say, like got completed. So
What do you mean like salvation work?
like my parents getting to like, I would say my parents getting to know Jesus and like getting really conscious about the fact of like a personal relationship with Jesus, not just the rituals going through, like not just knowing of God, but knowing God, like not just knowing about Jesus, who he is and like the stuff he did, but like knowing him personally,
Like
having
the head,
a
like the
relationship.
head knowledge of, okay, this is like
The-
factual. of who
correct.
he is.
Moving from the head knowledge to the heart knowledge. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And like through all like the people they met, the Bible studies that they went through, the kind of prayer meetings, retreats, they came to the full realization like of their faith in the late 2000s. And in fact, in 2009, a pastor from India actually baptized my dad in the bathtub of our home in California. And so that was, that was the completion of salvation there. And at first, when my parents like stopped attending a Catholic church and were attending like a Bible-based church, I didn't understand it at first. I thought like it's the same Jesus. Like, why are we going to this church versus the other church? It didn't really make a lot of it didn't make a lot of sense to me at first. And then, like in I was in about 6th or 7th grade at the time, and they were teaching us about the Protestant Reformation in our social studies classes. So at least through that, at least I was able to understand, okay, this is at least what the difference is. Like I know like why we're like what is the difference like when we go to this versus the other. But for me practically, like what is it really? Like I'm still reading the Bible, I'm still praying and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2010, a year after my dad gets baptized, like we moved to Austin, Texas. His work is what moves us there. And throughout that whole like process, like I'm slowly thinking and like contemplating like my faith and whatnot. Like I'm thinking to myself, like, I've grown up around Jesus my whole life. Like all my friends see me as a Christian. I've never tried to hide it. And I read my Bible, I pray, like my parents have been like teaching me to do that and whatnot. For me, it was really just a personal realization of what I believed. I'm doing all of these things, but why am I doing these things?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to church, I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, but like, why am I doing it? Like, what is the actual like meaning and purpose behind it? Like, it shouldn't be just because this is what my parents are doing. This is because like, this is to have a personal relationship with Jesus and like the change that he brings in your life. And I don't have a radical 180 degree come to Jesus like moment story. Like as I've mentioned before, as I've just mentioned, I grew up around church, I grew up around church like my whole life. I don't think at that age I was like doing anything like super like gone astray, like really like sinful or whatnot.
Stealing gum from the grocery store or anything? No.
No, I thought about it, but no, didn't get to it.
There you go.
But for me, it was really just a realization that like this is what it is. Like just aside, like this was not in like any like youth center, any retreat, or like any prayer meeting with like riding high on the adrenaline with everyone raising their hands. It was just a quiet, calm, like just decision on my part saying, yeah, like I understand the meaning behind what I'm doing right now. Just a conscious decision on that part. And I ended up taking believer's baptism again because as a Catholic, I was baptized as an infant. Like when you're first born, like your baptism or christening, I had that. But then I took believer's baptism again in 2011 when I was 14 years old. So that's when I got like proper, like that's when I like went before like our church congregation in Texas. And I was asked like, what is your profession of faith? I said, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and was like fully immersion baptized. So that's kind of like, that's how I got to know Jesus. It's a very long story that starts before I was even born.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing. And what a amazing story that, your parents come into faith when they were in India, and you being born there and being able to actually like understand it on your own at such a young age is that's amazing. So I guess since coming to know Jesus and fully believing when you're 14 and choosing to get baptized on your own, has everything just been great since then? Now you're 27. It's almost, half your life you've been really understanding kind of about Jesus, right? So how has that kind of shaped your thinking as you've been a young adult man? And has there been times where you've, faced temptations, or like what has that kind of been like?
Oh yeah, like to answer the first question of like, has everything been easy since then? The short answer to that is no.
Yeah.
Like just because you grow up like in the church and like grow up knowing Jesus does not mean that you're not gonna still like face temptations along the way. Like sanctification is a lifetime process. We're all like growing in our faith, and we're all going to be tested in it.
What does sanctification mean for people that don't know what that is?
As I've been using a couple big words lately, like salvation, sanctification. Like sanctification is like, it is exactly like as you might think the word is defined in the dictionary. It's like you're getting closer and closer to God. Like you being saved, like your salvation, like where you spend your ever after, that is determined by Jesus. Like his sacrifice on the cross determines that. But with sanctification, like that's our process of like, are we choosing to live more like Jesus? Are we is my life modeling that of Jesus to other people? And that has been like, that is a lifelong process. We're all going to be walking in it for the rest of our lives. And yeah, the temptations absolutely are there. Like 2015 was when I came out here to Atlanta for college at Georgia Tech.
Yep.
And I remember like,
Go Jackets.
Of course, always, always and forever go Jackets. And it was such a different stage of life for me. And I'm sure everyone who's been to college, like this is not unique to me. This is for everyone, that once you go to college, you're no longer in your parents' house. Like you're in charge of like, you can do you. Like, and there have been like, when you're a single guy like that at a young age, like living on your own, like with no like father figure, no parental figure on you, you're just surrounded by other people who are at your same stage of life. Like the temptations are real. Like I would be absolutely lying if I told you that I have not found myself at times like in places where I should not have been, or like I have taken decisions that like in hindsight like I regret. Like the temptations are there. That it's, to use like an analogy from like the book of Genesis is, you want to taste the forbidden fruit. Like, even though it's bad, like people have told you that your whole life that this is bad, this is a sin, yet still you want to know what it feels like. You want to experience it for yourself. And the peer pressure, like not having a lot of close Christian friends at that time was definitely like it definitely didn't help. It didn't help because I knew that like if I did something like this, my friends would not pull me back to correct. They would essentially say like, hey man, like if you're doing you like and you're not harming anyone, like yeah, you do it. And
right.
It was here in Atlanta, and also a couple internships I had while I was in college in other cities as well.
Yeah.
Like when you're living, like when you're on your own, like the temptation is like, it is very, very real. Like I've definitely given into my temptations at times. I've definitely done things that I do regret. I would say like where God keeps like pulling me back is like, even after I do these kind of things, it's that feeling of guilt. Like it's the feeling like that healthy guilt afterwards, that like you realize that like I messed up. Like I committed something that is a sin, and that brings you back to like repentance. Like, and I would remember like sometimes when I would engage in these sinful behaviors, I would be ashamed to even pray or ashamed to even face God. And afterwards, I find like after a few hours or the morning after, I find myself like, just, you know what, let me just force myself to my knees and let me like pray a bit here.
Yeah.
It's that process has been an ever-going cycle.
Yeah.
And as a single, like the temptations are there as a single man. And, like God's patience continues to wow me, because I just think about that. Like, imagine if there was somebody who like kept wronging you, and how long would like you and I as a person, like how much patience would we have to really forgive them if they keep doing it again and again and again? Like, they're sincere when they say they're sorry, but they keep messing up and doing it again and again. It's like the patience that God has to put up with me, like just wow.
Like a person, as an example, an analogy I've heard is if you keep loaning your car to somebody, like, okay, hey, I don't have a
Yeah.
car. Like, all right, yeah, here, you can use my car. And then they trash the car every time, like they get, it'll mess all over the place and they give it back to you. And it's just, what'd you do, man? Like, I thought you were going to take care of it. And then they're like, oh, sorry. Like, and then a week later, hey, can you borrow it again? Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Same thing. Trash it again. It's like, yeah, I probably would stop loaning my car to that person,
Absolutely.
they're not taking care of it. So yeah, it is awesome to understand the balance between God's forgiveness and the honor we should have for God and not taking that lightly.
Correct. Of course. Like, forgiveness is not a license to sin. It's a safety net for when you do sin.
Yeah. That's great, man. Thanks for sharing and being vulnerable with parts of your story there. So, okay, now being 27, what has it kind of looked like in terms of if you could go back and talk to yourself, when you were in college, or maybe you could talk to like yourself when you just had graduated, and what you know now that you wish you had known then, even though you've been following Jesus the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, the Bible verse that I would give to myself, my younger self, would be Matthew 6:33, which is, seek first the kingdom and its righteousness, and all other things will be added unto you. Throughout my high school and college years, I was always obsessed with like seeking after like the next accomplishment in life. In high school, it's you got to get into college. Once you get to college, got to get the internship.
Yeah.
Like after the internship, got to get the full-time job. Like, I really internalized like schoolwork and performance and that stuff. And like, I let it go to my head. Like, I really let it go to my head and was oftentimes defining myself by those things. I mean, if anyone asks my parents these days, like, they will tell you those like horror stories of like myself from like the conversations they've had with me in high school and college, where like they've been the ones telling me to like calm down, just do your best, like that type of thing. I was always obsessed with like, I want to accomplish the next big thing, the next big milestone in life. And what the Matthew 6:33 verse that I would give to myself then, which was that, you're running after all of these things. Like, all of these things are finite, and in a more practical level is, okay, you accomplish this, then what?
Yeah.
Like, you get into college, like, great, you want the next thing, like the internship. After the internship, you want the job. Now that you've got the job, it's like, now what? Like, I realized that like I would always be like chasing after and running after things that my mind would always invent something that I hadn't like reached yet, that like I have to get to this point.
Right.
And I would really tell myself at that time is, all this stuff you're pursuing like in a worldly sense, it's like, how much are you really pursuing God? Because that is the one thing that will sustain you all throughout. And
Yeah.
I can say in my life as a testimony, through those really low and rough moments, like, that's the only thing, like, sometimes that's the only thing to hold on to. Like, I mean, even the practical thing I said at the beginning of this podcast was like how frustrated I was on Friday with like my whole like refrigerator breaking down and the previous owners having essentially cheated me out of that. Like, there's nothing I like, and I was telling myself, God is good. God is good. Like, for people who've grown up in church, that might be like a little cliche type thing you hear, like, God is good all the time. But for me, literally in that moment, that was the only thing that could calm me down. Like, that was the only thing that could calm me down, that could give me peace. And when I look at my past with all the other things I was running after, like, I realized that what the human heart really wants at the end is a sense of security. Like, you want that feeling of like, you know what, I'm gonna be okay. Like, I'm gonna be okay. And like, in our world society today, that comes through like a good paying job, like a stable stable salary.
Yeah.
Like, and
House, like a marriage, like
marriage, a good social circle, friend group, and whatnot. Like, it is really those things that I'm chasing after, and I'm giving my self-worth based on that. Like, I'm feeding my own feeling of like worth based on like how well I accomplish these things. And it's like, I would tell my younger self that like, your worth isn't defined by these things, and it's going to be okay. Like, that is probably like one line I would tell my younger self again and again and again, that it's gonna be okay. Like, you don't know, like, God's got a plan for you, and like he wouldn't bring you this far just to drop you right here. Like everywhere you like where I am in life now, I'm trying to be a lot more intentional with how I do life and what I do and who I do it with.
Yeah.
When I'm not like taking out like anger and frustrations about work and stress on other things on like other people or even my family members like I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
Like I'm understanding now that like, hey, like God gave me this job to begin with. Like I would not have got this job. Like the company I'm working for now, I applied to them 3 years in a row before I got this current job. Like before, like not even a response back from anyone. And I got this job like in my last few months in college.
Yeah.
And I'm reminding myself, like, I would not have got this were it not for God's grace. Like everything I have today is because of God, and he will make it be okay. Like he'll put you in positions where he wants you. And like, I got to be more intentional as to like, how am I like representing Jesus in this stage of my life? Like be it in college, be it in work, wherever I am, like, how am I representing Jesus in this stage of my life? And not just chasing after like the next accomplishment. Yeah. Not just chasing after the next high, basically.
Right. Yeah. I think you do a great job of that, man. You're super humble, having gone to Georgia Tech and, not just having an undergrad, you went to grad school there, have a master's, and work at a great company, and you're just like crushing it from a professional standpoint. But like you never even mention that, whenever we hang out, you're never talking about, oh, how great I am, like got all these accomplishments. And that was something I put a lot of my identity and worth in when I first graduated. And being at a good school like Georgia Tech, it's like, oh yeah, I'm like better than everybody else. I'm smarter than everybody. And yeah, I feel like you do a great job of kind of not making that something like that's who I am. I'm this great person that has this great career. I'm this person that loves Jesus. So that's awesome.
It is very encouraging for me to hear that from you, because that is something I have tried to really work on myself since I graduated from college. And hearing from another person that like they're actually seeing the effects of that in my life, like that means a lot to me.
Yeah, man, of course. And I know we're in the same accountability group too. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning. So that's been awesome to kind of walk with you for the last 2 years or so that we've had that. So I guess before we jump into, dating and kind of your history there and your thoughts there, if you could say something to guys that are listening that are Indian specifically, I think that's like you have a unique perspective on that point of view where, it's such a minority, and you're a unique situation where you've kind of grown up in the faith your whole life. Maybe other Indians that don't have that background in faith, maybe what would you say to encourage them, or should they check faith out in terms of like a relationship with Jesus, or maybe what would you say to Indians that aren't following Jesus?
Yeah, I would say I can share them my story and encourage them to go beyond the ritual. Because whatever religion you might follow, like being like someone from India, like a lot of times it is what is passed down to you from your parents. It's your culture, it's your community. Like oftentimes a religious label there can be a marker of community more than it can be of personal belief. So I would encourage them to if you don't take your faith seriously, explore your faith and explore this Jesus guy. Like I can promise you, he's not like the other ones. I can guarantee you that it is a relationship. It's not just a religion. It is a relationship. And I also understand what it can cost you if you follow Jesus. When I say what it can cost you, I want to clarify there, in India, the persecution is there and there could be dire consequences for it.
Yeah.
Now, even the Indian community growing up here in America, in our culture, family is everything. It is such a central part of it is such a central part of your life. And for a lot of and these are testimonies I've heard from other Indian Christians, is that when they chose to follow Jesus, they know that it is going to cost them their family relationship. They know that their parents are going to have a tough time with it, saying that, you mean you're not going to celebrate these festivals with us? You're not going to celebrate this and that with us. You're not going to say these prayers with us anymore. And it's no, like I follow Jesus and Jesus alone now. I've had friends of mine, like other Indians, who've told me like, oh yeah, I prayed to Jesus. Like I have so many other gods. Let me add Jesus as one more.
Yeah.
Like believing in him, like the tough part is getting them to believe in Jesus, like as the way, the truth, and the life, as like the only way to God, and making that decision for a lot. And this is something I feel that like a lot of like non-Indians need to know when they're sharing the gospel with like Indians who are not Christian, is that you need to understand that from that person's perspective, faith, like religion or faith, is not just a personal endeavor to them. It's not just like, oh, what do I personally believe? How do I spend my Sunday mornings? Like it is their community. It is their sense of culture and their identity. And so there is a lot of sacrifice that is going to be required on that person's part to take that step. And with how much our culture emphasizes family and the familial unit, like not just immediate family here, but also the extended families like back in India and abroad.
Yeah.
Like it will be tough conversations, and there will be a lot of tough conversations, and there will be a lot of like tough decisions that will have to be made if they make this call. And you know, my family, we had a bit of that as well. When my parents like decided to stop attending a Catholic church, that was very difficult on my grandparents. It was very tough for them. It was a feeling almost that like, are you leaving our family? Are you like not one of us anymore? And like, just imagine, like for me going from like one type of Christian to another type of Christian, if it was that difficult for someone going from a non-Christian faith to following Jesus, like I can only imagine like the difficulties that they would have to face. So to people who like, to other Indian guys who might be watching this, who might think like, who might be worried about like, you know, what it might cost them, like, I guess what I can say is I'm here for you. Like I will be like your Indian Christian friend. Like I can provide, like I will do what I can to provide you the community. And I know other Indian Christians as well who can be your community, who can be like who can help support you in what will be your tough time.
That's really nice, man. Yeah, thanks for speaking to that. I feel like that's something you're uniquely able to talk about, you know, being Indian yourself. So I feel like it would be amiss not to have you touch on it. So moving into kind of your dating story. So you know, being a Christian since you were 14, how have you kind of thought about, you know, dating? I know there's also the, you know, cultural kind of pressures being Indian as well, and you know, your parents had an arranged marriage you shared, and so how is kind of your faith and your, you know, culture kind of all blended into dating? Yeah.
So let me say up front, when it comes to my dating history, is I have never had a girlfriend before. Like I have gone on dates before, but I've never been in a serious relationship before.
Yeah.
How I would say, like, as I've gotten more conscious, about my faith and serious about what I believe in Jesus, the number one difference in how I'm approaching like the topics of dating and marriage is being honest with myself as to what I am really looking for. Because this is something I've done this throughout my college and like first few years out of college, and I have seen this behavior in countless many of my friends, which is that you won't tell yourself the truth as to what you really want in a marriage or in a long-term, let's not even get to marriage, in a long-term relationship. I have I and people I know, like I have swiped right on girls. Like I have pursued relationships that like, I know that there's red flags in this, like from the beginning. Like I know that there's not a chance this is going to be a long-term relationship.
Right.
And when I look back at it in hindsight, I'm thinking to myself, man, who was I really kidding in this? Like anybody could have seen this from a mile away. I realized that a lot of what I was doing there was emotionally reacting to how I was raised with my parents. Exactly as you said, that my parents had an arranged marriage, which is a very common thing, still the norm in Indian culture and whatnot. And so dating was not even like, growing up, it wasn't something really talked about. It's like, it was the thing of movies type of thing almost for me. It's like, even when my parents would see that kind of stuff on like kid shows and whatnot, they'd be like, oh, okay. Like, I guess you can watch it on the show, but like, no, we're not doing that type of thing. And I realized that after I got to college, like a lot of the kind of like unhealthy stuff I tried to go after, and like some of the relationships that, thank God, like he stopped them, didn't let them go to fruition. Like me pursuing those things was an emotional reaction to what my parents had said. Like, I am not saying that my parents said everything my parents said was wrong or everything that they said was right, but in that mindset that I was in, I was lying to myself and just going after things that I knew would not make those relationships last long term. And you can kid a bunch of people and you can lie to your friends and every single person out there. Like, once you start lying to yourself and being dishonest with what you actually want in a relationship, like that's when you risk really getting to a point of no return. Because once you start lying to yourself, at some point you're gonna forget the difference between the lies and the truth. So as I have gotten, and I've seen this behavior in so many of my friends who are like my close friends, who none of them are Christian. I've seen this behavior in so many of them as well. When they've told me stories about past relationships, me as a third party looking at their relationship saying, what made you go after this relationship? You knew that there was not a chance this was going to last long term. You knew there was serious incompatibility in this aspect and that aspect of their beliefs, their lifestyle. Why did you still pursue this relationship and get as close and as intimate with the person as you did?
Yeah.
And many of them don't have an answer for it. And they don't have an answer for it because it's not a rational decision that they made. It was an emotional decision that they made. And I would be guilty if I said that I have not pursued and gone after those kind of relationships myself. And so the biggest difference with me is that I'm honest with myself now about what I want. Like, I'm 27 years old right now. Like, I'm kind of at the stage where it's like, if I was to date someone right now, it would be for the purpose of marriage. Like, I would be like, I'm not saying like the very first day I'd be like, so like, how many kids do you want to have? I'm not saying I would like do that,
Right.
But I'm saying like those conversations, like I would be very serious about those conversations that like, if we're going to have a long-term relationship, potentially going into marriage, like I would be honest with myself and with her. Because if I'm not being honest there, like you're damaging two people, you're damaging yourself and you're damaging the person you're in the relationship with.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome. You've kind of thought about it that way and are planning to approach it that way going forward. I guess, what would you say for guys that, they're trying to figure it out themselves now? They don't know if they want to actually even like think about dating in that way. Like maybe they just want to date for fun. Like, is that, like,
So
I know you said you haven't like been in a relationship before, but what would you say to someone that's just, well, what's the problem of dating for fun? Why do I have to date for marriage?
like I would say like, so I am waiting until marriage to like have, I am waiting until marriage to like have sex and like have like that kind of an intimate relationship. I will say that like, I don't mean this at all from like a bragging point and whatnot. Like I have not like hooked up or like been intimate with a girl like so far. Like I have other sexual sins that like I have committed, but like I have not gone that far with an individual. I've not gone that far. And I would encourage guys who are thinking of like making this a bit more casual and whatnot, like please, it will be worth it for you waiting until marriage, because is this a conversation you would want to have with your wife after you got married? Like that has been like how I think to myself is the things that I'm doing right now, like how many, like, do I want to be doing something now that I would be embarrassed to tell my wife of in the future? And I have things of that sort already, but like, do you want to add to that list? Like, I mean, in this, like, if we are being honest, like the simple things like watching pornography or like going out to a strip club or something.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you could find a room of guys where like the majority of them have not gone into that kind of stuff. So we all have those sins that are going to be like difficult conversations to have with our significant other. Do you want to keep adding to that list? Do you really want to like, do you want to keep adding to that list, and that after marriage, you having to confess all this stuff to your wife and all the baggage that you're going to bring, with you're gonna bring from those like past relationships that were casual.
Right.
And if you get too used to like being in like a casual relationship or trying something, if you go too far too fast in a relationship, thinking that like it's no strings attached, I'm just having fun, like you're gonna have a harder time settling down into a long-term relationship. That thought will always be in your mind that it's like, man, like, am I really feeling it? Like, am I feeling?
Yeah. What's the point? Like, this is getting hard.
Correct.
Let me just go to someone else.
Absolutely. Because you're like in those casual settings, you're not pursuing like an actual relationship, like wholesome with the other person. You're pursuing a feeling, man. Like that's what you're running after. And in marriage, like you're not gonna like, you don't need to be married to know that your feelings for someone when you're in your 20s are not gonna be the same as when you are in your 40s and in your 50s. So like if you're pursuing like feelings, like be them sexual or other emotional highs, like if that's what you're like, if that is your standard or your baseline for which you like judge and build a relationship, you're gonna like, you will have serious difficulty like forging a long-term relationship. And like I would say, like be honest with your like as the advice I've taken myself, be honest with yourself. Like, do you really see this behavior? Do you really see this behavior in like a spouse? Like, is this the kind of behavior that you would want in a spouse, like in your future wife? Like, I don't think so. Like when you're going into a long-term relationship, like you want something that is more founded, that is more grounded. Like, I'm not saying like that the attractions and those kind of things are not important. Obviously they are, but it needs to be deeper. It needs to be deeper than that. Otherwise it's going to run out of fuel a lot. It's going to run out of fuel a lot quicker.
Yeah. I think that's awesome, man. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing how you've committed to waiting until marriage. I think that's something that if there's like women listening, that they probably would not think that there's any guys out there that even, are doing that. So that's really admirable to have done that for 27 years.
Thank you. And, not to interrupt, but like, when you mentioned that point of like, have like women, like if there's women listening, what might they think is, I just like thought like something, a thought literally came to my mind right now. Like I had this is a conversation I had with one of my female friends from college, and now how she shared from her experience being in relationships, how she has said that so many guys that she's been with are expecting in the girl a kind of behavior that they didn't model themselves at all. In that when they sought out relationships, they were going for girls who like, oh, I can have the most fun with her. They were like, this is what I could never do when I was with my parents. The things that they didn't want in a marriage, they were seeking those things out. And now when they came to get married, they're expecting that behavior that they never modeled themselves in the girl. So like, I guess that would be another message to the guys out there, which is that like you need to be modeling yourself the behavior you would want in a future spouse. Like if you want commitment, someone that loves Jesus and is serious about serious about the things that you care about, you need to walk that walk first. You need to model that behavior first.
Yeah, that's great. And just want to make a point, no condemnation for anybody that has
correct.
done that. And I think that that's my part of my story, is how I have had sex before I'm married, and I'm not married now, I'm single, but through Jesus and through his death on the cross and through his blood, he's made it so there's no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. So not to excuse people that have done that, but there's no judgment when you're living a life with Jesus anymore.
It's forgiveness and it's grace. And I have to say, like, yes, absolutely no judgment there. And like, the standard that Jesus set for adultery, where he said, if you even look upon a woman with lust, you have committed adultery.
Right.
So we're all sinners in that regard. Like, so like when we discuss sexual sin, like we're not talking from a third person's perspective. We're talking from a first person perspective here.
Right.
At like every level, like we have all committed these sins. So like to anyone listening here, like, yeah, there's no condemnation for people who have done this. Like the advice and the things we're giving you here, like they're things that they're paths that we've gone down that like we would rather have not. And we're giving you like that advice to where you can hopefully avoid these paths.
Yeah, I think too, for me, once I came to even realize who Jesus was and what his teachings were, and well, okay, I've done some things that I'm not really proud of, and understanding that he doesn't judge me for those, that he forgives me for them if I believe in him, was like really freeing in a way. Like, wow, okay. But just because I have that forgiveness and that freedom now from Jesus doesn't mean I can just go back to doing it. And so I think once you really come to that realization of, okay, I really think I'm going to believe this Jesus guy, really going to follow him. What has your story been since then? I think is important, especially as you look toward dating and, relationships and marriage. What do you want to be able to tell your future wife or your future husband? Like, okay, I didn't understand before, but now that I do understand, like I've done this to clean up in these areas before I met you, not, hey, I just met you and here's like, just was having sex last week. So I think that's an important realization that I came to realize was, well, okay, I can rewrite my story starting today. I don't have to just be bound by what I did in the past. And I think that's hopefully something that can encourage listeners as well.
It is not easy. Like, full disclaimer there. Like walking in this path, like, it is not easy. Like, the temptations don't go away, but like, I believe that the struggle and like following the advice that Jesus gave, like, I think that path will be worth it in the end. Like, some of the practical things that like have been a struggle for me is sometimes just as a single dude living out here in Atlanta, like before I like got my house here, I was living in Buckhead for 2 years. Like sometimes the toughest thing to do is just stay in on a Friday or Saturday night. Like you're right in the middle of the city where like all the life is happening, where everything's happening. Sometimes the temptation is to just go out, go out and like and do whatever. Like the toughest thing sometimes has been like, I'm just going to stay back tonight. Like, it's not going to be the most exciting. It might not be the most exciting Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stay in.
Yeah, man. That's awesome. Such a great conversation, Ashwin. I want to wrap up with one thing that I ask all the guests. So let's say somebody sat here, listened to this whole podcast episode. Okay, awesome. This guy, Ashwin's story, he, coming from India and, being a Christian from such a young age, it's awesome. And he's kept the faith for this long. What would you say to single men that are listening if you want to them to like write something down or, okay, let me like remember this one takeaway from this conversation that Carlton had with Ashwin?
Yeah. The one the most important thing I'd want guys listening to take away is the part about being honest with yourself. That when you look for relationships, like, get real with yourself as to what you would want in a relationship and what you would not want. That's like, because if you don't be honest with yourself, you're going to find yourself chasing emotions. And at some point, you might forget what is real and what's not real. Like, you might forget, what do I really want versus what do I not really want? Like, really be honest about like the positive, like, things that you would want in a relationship, the positive things you would look for. And go out, like, when you enter a relationship, go after those things. Pursue those things. You can fool, like, and again, like, if you're not being honest with yourself, no one's gonna know but you. Like, this is not like it's not like someone's gonna like spite you or like say anything against you. Like, if you're not being honest with yourself, no one's gonna know. No one's gonna say anything against you, but you will be harming yourself in the long term. So that is like honesty with yourself and in turn, honesty before God.
Yeah. So great, man. Really encouraged by this conversation, Ashwin. Thank you so much for coming on and being vulnerable and sharing your story with the Single Man podcast.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, man. I appreciate everybody listening to this week's episode. If it encouraged you or you think a friend of yours would benefit from listening to Ashwin's story, I'd love for you to text them the link and tell them, hey, check out this guy Ashwin's story. I think you'll be encouraged by it. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday, and we'll see you next week for another new episode. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with a new episode. Until then, check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.